this lecture was established to recognize the remarkable career and accomplishments and outstanding scientific contributions of Professor Emeritus Dale Bauman across three wide areas that he worked during his career: animal biology, food science, and nutritional biochemistry. So, across those entities, he also had 4 primary research areas where he spent his time and efforts. Lactation biology, I think, is sometimes where he's most well known in terms of milk secretion, but he also worked in the regulation of metabolism and nutrient partitioning, animal-derived functional foods, and environmental impact of animal production. I'm only going to be able to give you a few brief examples in the time so we don't cut away too long from our lecture, from the actual lecture. From an early time in his career, Professor Bauman was very interested in milk fat synthesis and milk secretion. And once he was here on the Cornell faculty, he quickly established the amazing effects of bovine growth hormone on increasing milk production in lactating dairy cows. And it was his work that led to the commercialization of recombinant bovine gonadotropin, otherwise known as BST. I don't know how many of you know this impressive magazine. It's Hoard's Dairyman. I know you can't see it back there. But in 2010, Hoard's Dairyman did a spread in which they highlighted the 125-year history of Hoard's Dairyman and also important steps in the dairy industry. And as you can see here, in 1982, Dale was given credit for having established at that point in time the prodigious effects of growth hormone on milk production in the cow, 10%, but actually 15 to 20% increase in some cows. And after BST was commercialized, this just shows how quickly it was implemented, at least in the Northeast, and how big of an effect it had on average milk production in the cows that were treated. We give credit for BST having major effects on milk production, but as Dale recognized and pointed out to all of us, growth hormone has a lot of different effects on many of the tissues in the body. And so this is just a short list of those effects. And in probably his most famous review article that came out in 1980 on partitioning of nutrients during pregnancy and lactation, he introduced the world to the importance of homeoresis. And homeoresis is the orchestrated or coordinated changes for priorities of a physiological state, namely lactation in this case. Dale has been a very prolific publisher of his scientific works, and this particular paper, currently, depending upon whether you believe Web of Science or Google Scholar, he either has 925 or 1,477 citations to this article as of yesterday. As I said, he's been very prolific. In 2006, ScienceWatch actually surveyed the literature and agricultural sciences and ranked the institutions around the world in terms of the number of citations and their citation impact. And I've highlighted here how well Cornell University ranked in terms of the number of citations in the previous 10 years, that's 96 to 206, and the impact. Dale himself accounted for 15% of the citations at Cornell in agricultural sciences during that period. I think it's just a interesting figure. It's just indicative of his ability. Just to bring us up to date on citations, I don't have the indexes on here. I worry about I index and H index sometimes. But as of yesterday, 18,000 plus citations to works in Web of Science and 33,000 plus in Google Scholar. The last area that I just want to highlight real quickly, sort of the area in the later years in his career was environmental impact of animal production. And this is just one figure from one of the review papers, or one of the papers that he wrote with his colleague, Dr. Capper. And basically it says that over the last century, through the advances in genetics, nutrition, management, preventive medicine, and animal welfare, we've markedly improved milk yields in dairy cows in this country and other countries as well. And this has led to reductions in resource use and basically result in decreasing the carbon footprint of milk production and other agricultural productions. And you can see North America ranks very high in terms of the productivity per unit compared to some of the other parts of the world that haven't enjoyed such success. So could I ask Dean Catherine Bohr to please join me here? So Dean Bohr is the Ronald P. Lynch Dean of our College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and she's also a professor of food science, this department in this building, and she's going to make some remarks and about Dale, I hope.
In fact, you're right. And so it is truly my honor and my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon and to have this opportunity to present to Dale Bauman a plaque in honor of his more than 30 years of service to the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and to Cornell University. And I thank you, Dale, for your incredible contributions, which continue to resonate, as we saw on those charts there, in the fields of animal biology, in food science, and nutritional biochemistry. Your many important career achievements, your dedication to educating our students, and your commitment to serving our stakeholders through your outreach efforts have been truly inspiring, certainly to me, but I think to everyone who's here in this room today. I'm deeply grateful for the outstanding service that you've given to the Department of Animal Science, to the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, to Cornell University, and way beyond that, to the world. And I wish you continued happiness in your retirement. I thank you, and I congratulate you, and I'd like to present you with this plaque.
Hi, thank you. For those who don't know me, I'm Dave Levitsky from Nutritional Sciences, and I'm very happy to be here at this occasion. I've known Dale for a very, very long time, and I'm very grateful to see this conference in his honor. But our speaker today is, I would say, almost of equal fame. Terry Etherton is a distinguished professor of animal nutrition and head of the Department of Animal Science at Penn State. Dr. Etherton received his BS degree in agricultural sciences from the University of Illinois in 1971 and was awarded an MS degree in animal science from the University of Illinois in 1974. He received his PhD in animal science from the University of Minnesota in 1978 and was an NIH postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Medicine at Stanford University from 1978 to 79. He joined Penn State in 1979 and has served as the head of the department since May 1, 1998. He's recognized as a leading authority on agricultural biotechnology and the role that the endocrine system plays in the regulation of nutrient metabolism and growth. He has published more than 115 peer-reviewed scientific journals and has presented more than 190 invited seminars. Dr. Etherton has received many awards for his research, including Penn State's highest honor of excellence in research, the University Faculty Scholar Medal in Life and Health Sciences. Dr. Etherton was president of the American Society of Animal Sciences and the Federation of Animal Science Societies. Let us welcome Dr. Etherton.
It's an absolute special privilege to be here today to to celebrate the contributions of Dale and all that he's done for science, Cornell, previous graduate students like me, and you're really an icon. And so I just wanted to, you know that, but I want to share that. I've known Dale since 1972, and want to share a little bit about some elements of Dale that go beyond science. I had started an MS program in the Department of Animal Science, and as I was going through my first semester, realized this wasn't going as I thought it should have. Started in what I thought was a tactful way, complaining to my advisor about this, and with the hopes of resolving it. And to make a long story short, there were some efforts that were engaged, involved Dale in a significant way, that moved me out of the Department of Animal Science into the Department of Dairy Science to work with Dale. At the time, I didn't realize all the backdoor stuff that took place, but this is an example of what Dale has done and has touched many people. And so I want to thank you on this occasion, Dale. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the global food system and do this in an obvious overview manner, given the timeline. Future challenges and what the role of science is. And my position is that science is central to feeding a growing world population. As you'll see, there's other forces that are evolving that impact that as well. We waste a lot of food. There's mitigating things that will press against this, including climate and other geopolitical strife matters. What I'm going to talk about is Dale. Did that a little bit. I'll talk a bit more and do this in a way that doesn't make you too uncomfortable. Is that okay? Don't get nervous. I told Dale this. There's not going to be any stories that were embarrassing in any way. Pardon me? Well, this is really spatial. So anyway, I'll talk about the food system. I'll just pass over that. Yep. Population growth pressures, what has played out historically today as far as the adoption of biotechnology in the food system, how much food we might need in the global village. That leads to an interesting exercise of how do you quantify that across multiple cultures, different dietary patterns, and how do you survey food intake and the accuracy of that, and using a whole variety of things, including food frequency questionnaires. So when you see these numbers where people talk about how much do we need to feed the world, it's a best guess. The role of science, a little bit about when science meets consumerism, and that's a nice word to talk about folks that oppose science or don't value science, and that's a reality. In fact, there's been some technologies taken away. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then a bit of a perspective about what consumers have as views about food biotechnology. So the bottom panel has already been discussed as far as Dale's stature and standing. The photo in the upper left, though, it's amazing what you can find in Google. That's Dale on the left looking like the white tie and getting ready to go to some disco. The Nutrition Field Lab crew, that's Carl Davis in the middle and Jimmy Clark to the right. This is where I started my research career, and first paper I published in my scientific career was with Dale as a co-author. And the Nutrition Field Lab was this interesting little place out at the dairy farm that was off campus. And there were a bunch of students there that went through that program that did remarkably well. And we were put through the paces. And I was a master's student, but one of the traditions was students getting ready to do a comp or defend a thesis. At lunchtime, we're put in a chair in the middle of the room. Dale, Carl, we called him Flounder because he founded the fishing club. So those who fish, flounder is one of the species you'd like to catch. And Jimmy would come out and put the student through the paces and ask really hard questions, press them. We sat around the edge of the room and dared not laugh because then we were in the barrel. So we absorbed a lot, and I think that sometimes I think we should have those days in contemporary science. So you know about Dale's selection National Academy of Science. He chaired the board in agriculture. There's actually been a wonderful publication that the Academy published about Dale's contributions, which all of you should read. He was involved in the American Society of Nutrition as president. And 56 graduate students, postdocs, and visiting professors really doesn't capture it. And there's a lot of fabulously wonderful people, talented scientists who made a contribution in a very noble way that's moved scientific frontiers forward. So as an overview to my comments I'll share in the lecture, in feeding the world, we have looming challenges, and I'll elaborate on these as I go forward, about coming up with food to meet a larger and growing population, do this in ways that are environmentally and ecologically sustainable and socially sustainable, and try to assure that the world's poorest people are no longer hungry. Now, the last point is an important issue for many reasons. I don't know that we're ever going to solve that problem, but if you will, the process out of poverty in some way will involve an investment in ag production and how we take the findings that we derive from science and translate and implement those in. These are data that many of you know well, the population growth that's occurred to date, what's projected to take place by 2050. There's some discussion about how big the world will be at 2050, but it's probably going to be 9 to 10 billion. By 2100, we'll have another billion. So we're going to be putting a lot more people on the planet and putting further pressures on the resources that we have to produce food. I'll talk about that and the consequences of that. Next slide. So an organization that monitors adoption of biotechnology, ISAAA is the acronym. They have provided the data I've summarized here. We talked about the population evidence. This is one that's the challenge. In 1966, there's about 1/2 hectare of cultivable or arable ground available for farming. 1998, that had dropped to 2.25 hectares on a per capita basis. It's projected that we'll get to 1.5 hectares by the year 2050. So we have a shrinking land base on a per capita basis for food production. That raises the question of how are we going to feed the global village? I don't think that we want to chop down more rainforest and plant soybeans, nor do we want to destroy wildlife habitat. And at the bottom, you can see that basically we got to do something with food production to increase it and do it on essentially the same landmass that we have at this point in time. And do this in a reality where the ecosystem in the world is. There are a lot of people suffering hunger, malnutrition, and there's also an associated problem with socioeconomic status and poverty that accompanies this. Now, the discussion has been in several venues in the media that technology has not been adopted. This shows the global area or acreage has been planted biotech crops since their adoption in 1996. So the data, as you can see, it's for total industrial developing countries. And until this year, it had been going up at a pace at about 10 to 11% on an annualized basis. It's beginning to inflect at the top. Now, whether that's a sustained inflection or is simply a dip, don't know. But for those of you who go to lots of restaurants and read the popular press, there's a lot of folks saying we don't want to eat GM foods, GMOs are bad, and we'll see what that has as far as an impact on the aspects of continued use of biotechnology. This gives you some breakdown about the implementation or adoption of biotechnology. So about 83% of the soybean crop in some way takes advantage of biotechnology, 75% for cotton. Corn is less, but still substantive, and it's 30%. And canola has also been readily adopted. So there's lots of reasons to advocate for the use of technology. I won't get into those, many of you know that. But the point is that we need to continue to do something to feed the growing world. Now, is that to keep producing more food? Is it to do something that deals with food waste or feed food loss? And then the reality is that by simply producing more food doesn't translate to, at least in developed countries, people eating a better diet. If you look at the average diet consumed in the United States, it's terrible. We couldn't eat a worse diet if we tried, and so this is despite years of nutrition education and delivering best practices and what are ideal dietary patterns, and the dietary guidelines have been talking for years about. Here are some dietary patterns that should be followed. The problem is you can produce the food, how to get folks to adopt it. And to illustrate that, if you would look at all the money spent on research, obesity prevention intervention, that's, at least by NIH, has been going up. you look at the incidence of overweight and obesity, that's been going up in parallel, and so that illustrates the problem in translating science to events that work in the population. Those large-scale programs are very hard to do. So I'll talk a little bit about the food system, some context. In the United States and developed countries, we have a remarkably robust food system that produces lots of food, has done that historically, but it's very fragile or vulnerable. I mean, it could be tipped in a flash with pathogen outbreaks. Climate change, geopolitical strife affects food production and distribution. So we shouldn't presume that we're always going to have food there. And in the United States, we've never had the experience of going to the grocery store and having the shelves have about 30% less. Now, if that were to happen, we'd run a societal experiment to see what people do as far as responding to a shortage of food. This is a sketch of the food system, which many of you appreciate. From farm to fork, from the use of natural resources, commodity production, all the way around to food processors, value-added, events, food distribution, retailers, restaurants, final consumers. This is those two arrows. You know, lots of things taking place as local farmers markets where you bypass all of this. And in this, we have two elements that are getting recognized as being really important relative to how much food is lost. This would be food loss is food that's lost from farm to the table in some way that involves a processing loss, a weather event that affects the product. For example, in France last week, there was a terrible freeze, so some of the wine-producing regions in the Rhone and Burgundy are not going to have grapes this year. So this is a catastrophic problem for the folks that like to buy wine from there, as well as for the producers and the vintners. And food waste is, unfortunately, what we witness all the time when you go to dinners, events, and what's left on the plate. And I'll talk about this. If we could solve this, we'd go a long way to being better positioned to feed more people better. I'm always amazed by how adaptive the food system is and how complex it is. So in the United States, there's about 38,000 grocery stores that have over $2 million of sales. They got about 40,000 items of stuff in the store. So this is food, cosmetics, hairspray, the whole 9 yards. So the systems that are in place to operationally flow all of that is remarkably complex. It's always there. And this is a marvel that most of us really take for granted. The logistics that's involved in doing this are just mind-boggling. The US, there's now about 47,000 dairy farms producing about 200 billion pounds of milk. This number is decreasing. Farms are getting bigger, achieving scale from size, using technology as best possible. About 1,200 dairy processing plants. Another measure of the food system is about 90 million acres of corn planted in the United States per year. 9 billion broilers, which is a lot of chicken flowing through the food system. And then we're dealing with this reality that causes a lot of folks some angst, but the fact is that those grocery stores have 37% of the market share and can exert lots of pressures on the whole food chain as far as flow of food to the consumer. Another aspect of the food system is depicted in this slide. A lot of sectors in agriculture, there's some centralization or concentration of production. 25% of the milk in the United States is produced in those 11, 12 counties. And that comes with the reality of some environmental pressures as a result of that, moving and distributing the product to various places across the country. And then also from a disease standpoint, if you have a disease break that affects the dairy industry and it hits red counties, this really causes a big problem for the dairy food system. The broiler industry would be concentrated in the Southeast, so corn and soybeans in the Midwest. So my point is the food system has got points, focal points where there's lots of concentration. That red spot in Pennsylvania is Lancaster County, and it really drives the ag economy in many ways in Pennsylvania. So when I started doing science at the front end of biotechnology in the early 80s, I thought, you know, this is fabulous science, which it is, and Dale was developing what became recombinant bovine somatotropin. We were really caught up with the fact that we had all these neat technologies that could be commercialized, and it never entered my mind that there are going to be people oppose this and say it might be not good, it could be dangerous. So I posed the question, is this a strategy for feeding the world? Now I say this with the understanding that if it's not, then someone needs to come up with a better solution for how we're going to do this. Are we going to restrict intake? Are we going to have some way to ration food to folks that have it? What are we going to do for the developing countries where there are a lot of people that are not eating the diet that we do? And we need to be advocates for this. I believe that very powerfully. So the key challenges, and I've talked about this, it's summarized to some extent. We're going to need to feed 9 to 10 billion by 2050. We're still competing with a bioenergy market that's diverting some cereal grains to ethanol production. We should try to do this to contribute to overall development, poverty reduction, and cope with scarce resources, including water, and shift to more sustainable production methods. And then adopt the best practices that we can as far as reducing greenhouse gas. Now, in this process, we presume that geopolitical strife is not going to impede food production, but the irony is that the science I talk about in a positive way, that also could be used in a way to create strategies that would be used to target food production systems, that is, have intended releases of some pathogens that would cause a problem for plant-animal production. We haven't had that happen in this country. That's on the radar screen because when military forces went into Afghanistan, when Al-Qaeda was still operative, they found what I'll call manuals that were basically outlining game plans to use science and biology as a way to upheave food production. So we're talking about the need to feed the world, but there's lots of vulnerabilities. We're attacking science, and we need to do something that frames this question to the public about why we need to do this and the value of doing it. How many of you seen this slide? Jeff Simmons, who's the president of Elanco Animal Health, which is the subsidiary of Eli Lilly, made this assessment. 50 years, we need 100% more food, and 70% of that's going to come from technology and efficiency improving technology. It illustrates the concept that we need to embrace science, but how do you come up with the numbers? I had a class once try to come up with this estimate, and my point is that it's very hard to do. The fact that the population is growing will obviously indicate that we need to produce more food. I don't know that you can defend any of these numbers other than it illustrates the point that population is growing. That's going to have an impact on what we're trying to do from a societal perspective. Now, this kind of captures the problem with the U.S. diet. Some of you have seen this. This is the most recent dietary guidelines. So that says intake below recommendation or above limit. So this is based on data that was in 2015-2020 dietary guidelines. When we strive to enhance food production to feed the world, we'd like to have them eat a better diet or a healthy diet. We've been advocating this for, Dave, how many years we've been trying to do this? Decades. Decades. So as you can see, we underconsume vegetables, fruits, total grains, dairy foods, protein foods, and liquid vegetable oils, which recent research has shown quite clearly has benefits in cardiovascular disease risk. That's both MUFAs and PUFAs. And we're over-consuming added sugars, saturated fat, and sodium. So there are really tremendous gaps between what the population is consuming and what they should. So whatever we do from a standpoint of cranking up the food system to produce food to meet a growing population, we have the challenge of how do we get the public to have a better dietary pattern, to eat a healthier diet. We have an obesity epidemic that's ongoing that has a huge public health care cost. that has a major impact on GDP. And it's easy for me to stand up here and talk about it, but the fact is, it's really, really difficult. And the fact that we've not made progress after years of science speaks volumes. So then, it's really population, how do you modify population behavior? That's really, really difficult. And I'd encourage you to, in fact, challenge you to contemplate. It's one thing to develop science, to try to use science from the standpoint of the food system. It's very important that be linked to processes to get people to follow a healthy dietary pattern. This was published by some folks at Stanford in 2010. They used the word food waste. I put loss in. They came up with some estimates. Now, it is really an interesting science question, a scientific question. How do you estimate food waste and food loss on a population basis? And do that across different cultures within the society over different seasons. Now, setting that all aside, they got a paper published in Science and concluded about 30 to 40% of what's produced is wasted in developed and developing countries. And you can see that where this wastage takes place varies depending upon developing countries. Since Adam Loxer, I thought I threw in the UK. And you can see what happens in the US where there's a lot of waste that takes place in municipals, restaurants, and at home. This is recognized. How many of you have been to a reception? There's a lot of food left on the table afterwards. We might experience this right here in about 10 minutes. And when you go to restaurants, there's a trend to having large portion sizes so people feel like they get a value for their dollar. And they tend to overconsume, and then they leave stuff on the plate. And I'm very mindful, I stand up here, as I said earlier, and talk about this. It's a terrible social problem. And really, how to fix it, I have no idea. I mean, we've made a run at this for a long time as far as trying to modify people's diet and dietary behavior. FAO has recently launched a Save Food initiative, and they came up with estimates that are remarkably similar, and you can read that. They also came up with an estimate that on a global basis, this is about $1 trillion in economic loss, which is really, really profound. So I think the data are there to say, here are the metrics around the issue. It's a part of the food system. It's one that we don't really have a big research base for, and we need to get going on that. Because if science is taken away, as far as food biotechnology and animal agriculture and plant science, then we need to find another way to deal with the pressing problem of feeding the world, and this would be one really key strategy. Okay, here's a topic that Dale and I have been involved in. I've sort of stepped out of it, and Dale has as well, but for a long time we were in the midst of this cyclone or tornado, which was people that had different opinions that were scaring the public. I won't talk a lot about this, but you can scare people in 30 seconds about something, but you can't educate them in 30 seconds. And if it involves science, it's really not possible to do that in an entertaining way. So the challenge is how to communicate science messages to a public that, for the most part, we see that science literacy is really high. In some ways, in real ways, this is an indictment of what we do. The National Science Foundation does an annual survey of scientific knowledge. They survey about 2,000 college graduates. And about 3 years ago, I looked at one of the surveys, and one of the questions was, true, false, the center of the earth is very hot. And 19% of the survey respondents missed that one, which you'd think, how do you do that? And then there's a question that's short, one sentence answer, or at least you're supposed to provide one sentence. What's a DMA? About 80% missed that. So my point is, you're trying to communicate science and people either don't understand, don't like it. It gets to be very difficult. And people can be swayed. So to give you a perspective about the US consumer, we, and I myself included, we talk about the need to do this, but then we're all, at least a lot of us are guilty of this. We overconsume everything. You know, we're 5% of the world population. We burn through about 25% of the natural resources, oil and natural gas. I just dug out this number here, which people like a nice house. The State College got a lot of big houses. Driving around Ithaca, there's a lot of big houses here. So since 1973, the average home 62% bigger, despite having fewer people in it. That's one metric of, it's not gluttony, but it's overconsumption. And we're not going to go tell people to bulldoze their house or downsize it. And the idea of telling people to build a smaller house after they achieve some economic success is a bit of a stretch. So what do we do? What do we do? Another aspect of the consumer culture is, I wanted to share, this is a collage of things that used to give me high blood pressure, but I've sort of adjusted. This one is by a person that Dale and I really, I won't talk about. This book's really a misrepresentation of facts, and because he's got an MD, many people made the presumption he was smarter than Dale and me, so that's a label effect. And would you agree physicians are smarter than PhDs? Careful, careful. When this came on time, it said, forget organic, eat local. That got the organic crowd stirred up. And there's lots of sectors in agriculture. I value that. But some compete for the market space by attacking science, saying that their production method is better than somebody else's. Some in the organic crowd do that, and that misrepresents the facts. Now, if people want to eat organic or other forms of, or other outlets from different food production sectors, I'm okay with that. But don't disparage and attack science. Now, we live in an ecosystem where that doesn't happen. This one right here, Seeds of Deception, is another interesting piece of work. I was at a meeting in Washington, D.C. years ago and got in a bit of a verbal joust with Bob Cohen. I told the graduate students at lunch that you should always be level-headed and composed and not misslip when you say things, because you get in debates with people you want to throttle. Well, you can't throttle them. But at this one, it sort of got a bit cranked up. But here's the book, Milk the Deadly Poison. So the public sees that and it resonates in a way where they wonder what's up. And Righteous Pork Chop, that's a kind of a fun read. Anybody read that? No one's read Righteous Pork Chop? Anybody read the, okay, I won't talk about that. One of the challenges just the consuming public and what they know about agriculture. And part of this is a compilation of observations and survey data that I've put together over time. They're not sure where food comes from. They have some science knowledge void that many will readily admit. And this knowledge void is an opportunity for industry and activists to exploit. And that has happened. We've kind of evolved into a system where some consumers don't trust scientists. Science is complicated. We have a language and a jargon. So how do you talk about that to folks that aren't? One of the classes I teach, I tell the kids they should go home and tell their parents what an amino acid is. How do you explain that? And then if you want to really get to an interesting conversation, have them explain a hormone. And then hormones are good. We have hormones circulating around. But some get concerned about hormones in food. Well, everything has got hormones. So the blame for this falls, I think, squarely in the scientific community. This confusing description of science makes it easier to manipulate public opinion about science. And the other side doesn't worry about an evidence base. We have, by virtue of going through the scientific method and training, it's collecting data accurately, making sure that it's been statistically analyzed in an appropriate fashion. The scientific method has replication where others obviously do things to affirm the point, so there's a database that builds to the conclusion we have a finding that's meaningful. Folks that attack it don't think that. This illustrates the point that many consumers have a poor grasp of biology. I've done this a couple times, and my wife Penny told me to stop. At a party we had asked people to define crossbreeding. So this says about half the population has got a clue about this. We've been doing it since we were in the caves and evolved out of the caves and evolved animal agriculture, plant agriculture, and unwittingly, by selecting for traits we like, we were doing genetic modifications and moving genes around. Only 20% of consumers say they've eaten a crossbred fruit or vegetable, which is just remarkable. And then 34% have indicated that there's foods in biotech, and it just boggles my mind, because trying to understand the consumer is important, because if you're going to educate them, you got to figure out how to reach them. You've got a scale problem. You've got this obstacle to deal with, and then the complexities of the science nomenclature. The International Food Information Council has done surveys for many years. They used to focus on biotechnology and look at what people thought of in its adoption rate. This is a derivative, and the question that I want to focus on this data is, do you think there's a role for biotechnology? And you can see when you look at these various perspectives that were, about a third of the population is unsure. 28% think that sharing a sufficient food supply is okay, but there's still a large residual of people that just don't know. There's a question here: what is your overall impression of using biotechnology, GMO, to produce food products? Would you say you are? And you can see the survey responses across the map. About a quarter of the folks say there's not enough data to make an opinion. There's about 13% not at all favorable. And this is what most surveys tend to show when you have surveys where they can pick from an answer. Now, if you do open-ended surveys where they got to pick the answer out of the sky, and this group has done the survey, ask folks what they're concerned about in the food supply, biotechnology is usually less than 1% of the respondents. But it's how you do the survey. And I've been at events where people have put up survey data. I was telling Ron Butler about this. This was about a group talking about that the consuming public was really supportive of organic dairy foods. 80% of the respondents said they were supportive of this. And one of the slides on the slide set, this guy forgot to take out the source in the lower right, and they had done the survey on organic-minded consumers. They hadn't done a survey across the population. Interesting how that happens. So in closing, I want to convey that there's a battle that's ongoing. It's still ongoing over the adoption of science and what more broadly can be referred to as food biotechnology. That battle takes place in many ways. The technology that Dale pioneered, recombinant bovine somatotropin, has largely been taken away for reasons that relate not at all to science. It's strictly been driven by marketing. And when you go to the milk case, you'll find every carton saying, from cows not treated with BST. Well, every cow on the planet's got bovine somatotropin in the milk. It's been there. Treatment doesn't affect it. And that is part of the reality we're dealing with. There's attacks on production practices, how we raise animals, the farming enterprise, and in some ways, farmers' freedom to operate. When the discussion in Pennsylvania is taking place about not using BST, I had several producers call. This to them was an important economic deal, and they asked what I could do. A couple of them were very emotional. Well, I couldn't rescue you. In fact, the thing that annoys me to no end is at the Penn State Dairy Farm, we sell our milk to Land Lakes. It goes to the creamery, Penn State Creamery, which I think competes with your creamery. At least that's what I'm told, as far as brand name. Anyway, we were told that we had to stop using this. If we didn't stop using it, they were not going to haul the milk. So what do? If milk doesn't go off the farm, then I've got a revenue problem for the department. So that's some elements of what's in the mix. So I don't think we're by any means at the end. These societal problems are going to be very challenging. One of which is if we use science, now it's 10 to 15 years from commercialization or from discovery at the bench to commercialization with tens of millions of dollars being sold, companies needing to recover their investment, private sector being very nervous to get into this arena because of the threats that are there and the attacks that take place that can hinder dramatically the sale of their product. I don't think that young scientists should accept the idea that you're not going to need to stand up for yourself. You need to advocate. You need to be engaged in the public discussion. A lot of training programs play out where you are trained very well to do research. You learn to write the papers. You understand the whole process of grants and what you need to do. But you need to really become your own ambassador for the need for and role of science in society. If we don't do that, then we're at some point going to be in a real problem as far as a crisis in feeding the world, whether we simply don't have technology to use, we don't solve the food waste, or something happens which is really unpredictable, that somebody tries to blow up the food production system by attacking it. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Etherton, for a very inspiring and thought-provoking talk. My name is Carmen Moraro. I'm an associate professor in food science, and it's my honor to invite to the podium now Professor Pat Johnson, who is the department chair in animal science, for a special presentation.
Thank you, Terry. I'd like to present on the part of our department, Animal Science, as well as this lecture series in recognition of your accomplishments and your stimulating talk. A plaque that we have to do. It says, for the first inaugural award, the Dale A. Bauman Lectureship. Maybe I need to go here. Cornell University, Ithaca, New York, the inaugural lecture presented by Terry D. Etherton, Distinguished Professor of Animal Nutrition at Penn State, May 2nd. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
And we do have now an opportunity for questions for the audience. I don't know if we have any microphones here, but if you could please raise your hand, speak up as much as you can so everybody can hear that. And Professor Etherton will entertain questions until about 5 o'clock.
Yep. I'll stand in front of the mic too, so, not wander around.
Any questions? Yes, please.
Hi. So I've heard a lot about the idea that more communication and more knowledge helps a lot in terms of helping people understand what it is that we're communicating. But actually, I've gone to talk earlier this week where what was said instead was that, you know, we do think that if we make the information more available that people understand, what happens is rather than more knowledge, what plays a bigger factor is how people are brought up, their upbringing, their culture, background, etc. So that plays a big factor in what they'll believe and what they're willing to let go. So the talk was in regards to climate change, but you know, it's kind of along the same line. So I just want to know, with that, what are scientists doing, or how can they tackle that if it seems like that's really where the issue lies?
So to summarize the question, it's how do we better communicate science to the public, and do that where it gets across cultural boundaries and different learning styles. And it's a huge, huge problem. I mean, you're talking about fundamentally a public education campaign that would cost tens of millions of dollars. My perspective is that each of us needs to do it in a way that we catalyze. For years, I got into the situation talking to journalists where a lot of stories are framed about food biotechnology where there's a villain, victim, and vindicator. So what is the role of the scientist in that deal? So there's a villain, victim, vindicator. What are we? So it's like an opera. There's three actors. The scientists are they the victim, the villain, or the vindicator? We're the villain. And the victim is the consumer. And then the vindicator is some NGO that says they're coming to rescue people from scientists. Now that's a bit of dramatization. But there's many problems. How do you get heard in an ocean of social media? People are blogging. You have a lot of stuff on the web that's very factually inaccurate. And it's really, really difficult. And there's not many good science journalists that work for major media outlets. And I have no illusion that there's an easy path forward. I got tired of dealing with journalists and started a blog, which I've since stopped, but for about 4 or 5 years, putting things on that I thought dealt with issues in a way that were scientifically based. There was evidence base for it. And I think it got traction, but it wasn't like I had a TV show like Dr. Oz, which that's another topic I'll stay out of. It's difficult. Yes?
With that said, how do you think we should reframe the scientists in that situation? Because watching other professors like Kevin Holton and several people try and step out and talk about biotechnology, they've gotten clearly their career discarded.
You get hammered. How do we reframe it? That's a really great question. The scientific method's the greatest thing, one of the greatest things we ever invented, and I think we need to convey that to the public. There's a value proposition with all this, where people are making decisions about what they like and not like way ahead of their understanding. Let me experiment. This is somewhere in the mix. I've got 2 questions. Since Cornell, you guys can handle this, right? Really short. How many of you think it's okay to clone a human? Raise your hand. Hi. So it's okay to clone a human. That's about 1%. That's about the typical response. I've asked that question lots and lots of times. So how many of you think it's okay to use cloning technologies and stem cells and use those producing a heart for transplantation? My view is in 20 years, we'll be able to do that in a laboratory setting. So is it okay to use cloning technology, stem cells, produce a heart for transplantation to save grandma? Why did you change your mind? And how many of you deeply know what cloning involves? That's the nuance. And it's those concepts that become important in communicating. So you can frame the message in a succinct way, but then how do you get it heard? I have no easy answer. It's not like Dale's got a segment on CNN. Yes.
I think if I was down the hall or across the campus and I listened to a presentation on organic agriculture, it would be a completely different set of examples and experiences
Yes.
brought up. So my question is building on these other 2. How do you engage with the differences within the scientific community? So it's not an antagonistic relationship, like for one that builds a better synthesis.
Well, my operating assumption is that we should all be pursuing the greater good ahead of self-interest, but that breaks down sometimes. And you have just conveyed that people have different perspectives and mindsets. And I try to talk through this in a way which is, okay, A, what are your concerns about this? What are your alternatives? We have a large effort going at Penn State. The Sustainability Institute's been created. They call it a sustainability farm. It's actually a vegetable garden. It's about an acre. They've got more media per dollar invested in that facility than anybody. It's just remarkable. How did they get that footing? And the reality is that it's very difficult to get people moved off a point of belief. I mean, there's folks that passionately believe that this production process and methodology is better than that. Science is good, science is not good, this works better than that. And to modify behavior is really difficult. It's really difficult. So I try. My success rate, I don't know what that is. It's probably about as good as the programs that have been done to reduce obesity and overweight in the United States. Yes.
I have a question about where you see the role of, when you present the diagram of the chain, where you see the role of farmers markets with respect to the rising need for biotechnology. Do you see them as competitors, or do they kind of work in?
So you're asking about the role of local markets in the food system. You know, I strongly believe that choice is important. If people want to do that, that's fine. Well, my son lives in Manhattan, and so in the summer we go down to Union Square, and there's a lot of folks that come in and bring food, making a pile of money. My view, they've upped what the value of it is, but Manhattanites are happy to pay it. They get something fresh. So if you sell something, somebody buys, you've got a market that's made. So I think all of this is important. I just don't want some cohorts to disparage others over things that are not factually based as a way to enhance their market position and or agenda. Yes.
So what's your opinion towards educating people on what to eat, what not to eat? So here's a lot of scientific proven on some specific type of food that is engaged with a lot of energy or source wasting or high energy costs for certain kinds, for example. Like, elements that's praised for consumption or plant-based protein or animal-based protein.
As we push ahead with population, we're going to have to be very efficient from a production standpoint. That is, maximize food production in whatever way we can. In parallel with that, as cultures evolve and become more affluent, they start eating more animal protein. I think there's ways to meet that demand and do it in a way that you're using ground that couldn't be farmed for other things. Pastures where you've got significant hillsides and slopes. Aquaculture. I was in Portland not long ago and went to a restaurant and they told me that I should get the fish. You know, they had fish they labeled as caught with a hook, not netted. And it was interesting to talk to them. Well, what's the difference and what's your value system? And so these things all get intertwined in ways where, we have a growing world population. We've got a lot of hungry people. We're going to probably have that forever. The historical record of developed countries helping developing countries is not great. So we have to embrace things that are very, very operationally efficient. Sustainable is a word that means many different things to many different people. So I think we need to pursue the greater good, because if we wait to 2040 and realize we got a problem, we're not going to fix it in the near term. David? Yeah, I
think that we, as in the food business, in academics particularly, that in every aspect, whether it's food science, nutrition, animal science, food production, we have to grasp the reality of a new concept. And that is a concept that we have to eat less. Okay?
Yes.
And not eat just because food is there.
That's right.
All societies that I know, our professional societies, have refused to entertain that question. For the food production side, every time I get an argument with somebody, they have a fear that that's going to decrease profits. But if you look at the obesity curves, you look at the increase in obesity, we're talking about between 50 to 200 calories a day. That's not going to hurt profits. And that's a lesson that's got to come out in government form. The last dietary guidelines, you have to strain your eyeballs to find one sentence in that entire document that talks about eating less.
That's right. And have you given a talk where you've advocated that and how you're going to do it? I once floated the idea of let's have I call it an obesity tax and got in trouble for that. And I mean, it's a very good point, Dave. And we have a lot of people that overeat, and I can't think of any way we're going to fix that. And this goes back, I mean, I've been a department head for 20 years, and I have instances where I've got to try to get people to modify behavior, do things differently. You get a transient response, they regress back to the mean. If you have any success, they got to go downtown and see a therapist. You got to work real hard at it. And my observation is you might have a 10% chance. On a population basis, I mean, Penny's got 5 siblings, and a couple of them, I've tried to have this discussion about, they're both, anyway, I won't get into that. I've had the same outcome that you've had.
Thank you. Thank you very much.